Hello my friends, I hope you're having a fantastic day or night wherever you are. Today I want to talk about the Nikon Z6 after 10 days of having it. Now, to be clear, I do have the Mark III version and I'll be talking a little bit about those versions. Just to give you a brief outline, this camera I'm looking into at the moment is the Nikon Z6 Mark III, and over here we have a GH5 as well with an 18 to 200 f3.5 to 200, then goes down to 5.6 when you're around 200mm, and this is shooting on the Sigma 18 to 35. So by no means is this how good this image can look, but this is the best setup I could do, and I wanted to do multicam today. So as I've now got two video 4K capable cameras, so there we go. And or during this video, this camera is completely on autofocus, as you can see. It's going to keep my eyes in focus, in theory. So if it drops out, you'll see it in that respect. So 10 days ago, I bought this camera. Very exciting. Simple reason, really, to give a little bit of context, a little bit of rationale behind why I actually bought this camera specifically, because a lot of people ask me, why did you not go Sony? Why did you not go to the Blackmagic line, etc, etc, etc. The simple reason, or the more simple reason about why I even purchased a new camera in the first place was the GH5, which I'm shooting on over here. I've been using for 5 years, bought that for about £1,000 second hand in 2019. Was a big jump because I was coming from a Nikon, I think it was a Nikon 5600 at the time, that I had used for the previous 2 years and had absolutely no issues with outside of the rain damage and such that I've done to it. There's videos on the channel about. If you want to hear that story, I'll leave it in the card. But anyway, so I was getting lots of work, doing lots of things with the GH5. It's my daily driver, using it every single day to create content for Branded Media's marketing, but also, of course, for client content as well. And I found that the touchscreen on the back, so 95% of digital cameras nowadays have touchscreens on the back. The actual touch element of that screen ceased to work, which meant I couldn't really review footage, which is a little bit of a pain, but kind of not really a big deal, because I had a bad habit of really checking footage before leaving, especially on wildlife stuff. And so that was one of the reasons. But normally when we have a mechanical failure, there's some level of warning signs, right? And there's a level of concern in regards to, I can't really, because I'm a professional videographer, professional photographer, I can't have a camera break, right? So I always need a camera that's working, at least one, in that respect. So I was looking around and doing some research, and I've got Nikon glass, so I was kind of stuck to Nikon. So I looked at what Nikon had to offer. Originally, I was looking at the the little brother of this one, which is the Mark II, right? Because it's a lot cheaper. You can get it for about £800 or so second hand, cheaper than a second hand one of these. I'll go into prices later. And pretty much good camera, but there was a couple of things which I'm going to touch on now, which I didn't really like and was going to be really irritating for my workflow specifically. One of which being a fully articulating screen, right? You'll see this quite a lot where people should look into the lens directly and make eye contact with that audience or your audience that I'm talking to. But also, for me, I like to be able to monitor what I'm doing, but also because I do a lot of hybrid shooting in regards to how I go about filming and what I go about filming. So I'm shooting a lot handheld. Some of the time I have to hold the camera above my head, and one of the keys in being able to do that is being able to tilt that screen so I can see and frame up still and keep that framing. So for me, I think it's really, really important to have a fully articulating screen. So that's very, very key for me. Number two, I also do wildlife filming quite a bit. So the concept of a electronic viewfinder is very, very important to me, and the jump was close, but it was pretty close in regards to the electronic viewfinder was more powerful and was a lot clearer on the Mark III because it's more modern and because it came out this year rather than the Mark II. So for me, this was kind of a combination. I was going to end up buying a new camera in the new year anyway. I had a budget in mind, had an idea in mind, what I wanted to spend. So I was looking on MPB, and I found a Nikon Z6 Mark III, which is this exact camera, and I found it for about £2,000 second hand. Right now, I was like, okay, that's you know, what I kind of want to spend or what I'm roughly looking to spend on a camera. And the issue was, or the conversation came, I popped into town, had a conversation with a local camera shop, shout out to Castle Cameras, and they were running a Black Friday deal. Suckler for Black Friday deals. The thing was, I could have got, and I did end up getting this camera for around, I think I ended up spending about 2,300-ish with the adapter, but without the adapter, just body, I think if I remember correctly, it was £2,088 specifically. So the benefits, of course, of having a brand new camera with a zero shutter actuation amount. So in regards to the fact that I'm, you know, going to use this camera every day as a photography camera, as a videography camera, as a time-lapse camera more specifically, because when, as a time-lapse camera operator or someone who uses their cameras to shoot time-lapses, anyone who knows that will know you can easily add thousands of actuations onto your shutter. So you know, there was an opportunity here for me to be able to get that zero shutter count, which means I'm going to get more lifespan out of this camera, and I'm aiming to basically have it last me as long as the GH5 has done, and as you can see, the GH5 is still working, but it's potentially going to die. So the next big question I think everyone on their mind when they come to purchasing a camera specifically is going to be, how and why would you purchase another camera, right? And I think for me, the key in what we do as videographers and photographers is firstly create a vision. I have on my main monitor here that I'm monitoring both cameras on, sell vision, not shiny syndrome, right? And what that means is that talks about the vision or the solution that we're trying to sell as content creators for our clients, right? And I think that's really, really important. And sometimes we get really hemmed up on those stats, hemmed up on what we're doing and how we're doing it. But the key for me is to be able to fix that problem, to be able to fix that content creation problem for our clients. And this will lean into obviously having a jump in image quality, which you will get from having a larger sensor, right? I'll show some example footage here, especially when you're using full frame glass. Now, at the moment, I only own a 150 to 600mm lens, which is a wildlife lens or sports lens, and that is the only full frame piece of glass I actually own. But the jump from full quality, like the quality in image, just in sensor size alone, is drastically different, right? Now, it's not really a fair comparison. I am going to continue to kind of refer to what I'm used to, which is the GH5, to this Nikon. But that is an unfair comparison. GH5 came out in 2017, right? This camera came out 2024 in the June, right? So we're talking months old at this point on this camera, right? Now, this camera is also a hybrid camera. They're both technically hybrid cameras, but my problem or my issue is I didn't like and I didn't trust how the images on the GH5 came out. They were shot in a 4:5 aspect ratio. This is more traditionally 16:9, and for me, I couldn't rely on it, right? So for me, it's about being reliable. If I'm going to go to a client, I'm going to say, I can rely on the autofocus. I can rely on being able to switch between video and photos quickly to grab those moments, to grab those differences. And especially as a solo shooter, which is most of the time, right? I'm fortunate enough to get some projects where I can bring other help on, and then we shoot on cinema camera and cinema glass, etc. But the crux is 95% of my work, especially my event work, is going to be solo, right? So this is an event soloing camera, and this is what this camera is designed for. Nikon has designed it to be as conveniently as possible a solo camera, right? So it can work as a photography camera, it can work as a videography camera. Now for me, having an all-rounding camera like this is incredibly valuable because it means you can purchase one camera, get lenses that work with that camera, and then you have the same toolkit, right? Now, as my career progresses, and in a world where, unfortunately, touch wood, this isn't going to happen, but in a world where the GH5 did die, I would most likely buy a Blackmagic 4K to replace it because that image is lovely and is beautiful. Now, there's going to be the conversation around color balance and color science specifically. I know that. And for me, they are matchable. Part of the reason why I'm doing this test is to see how matchable they really are. But I've matched GH5s to Blackmagics before, I've matched GH5s to Sony cameras before, etc. So it does take some extra post work, yeah, sure, and you can never get it 100% perfect, and if you can, and you have the budget and you have the ability to shoot all one brand to keep that color science, then do so. But sometimes in a pinch or in a budget concern or etc., we don't always necessarily have access to that, or don't necessarily always have access to being able to do that specifically. So for me, I plan in most cases to use this as, when I use a photo camera, I'll be using the actual built-in batteries, and then whenever I'm using video, specifically, I'll be using Vlogs. So the reason why I won't be talking about the video lifespan on this battery, just in this video, I will do some tests for the full review that I'll be doing in the near future, probably into the new year, when I've had some more event experience with this camera, as I will allude to a little bit later on what I've actually shot on this camera. I have only, because of the time of year we are, there isn't actually that many events going on, so I haven't had enough chance and event context to fully put this camera through its paces yet. But come New Year, of course, that will change. But in my testing, I have managed, or I get around 3,500 raw and large JPEG files from one battery, specifically in that regard as well, which I think is pretty substantial. I did end up buying another battery for this, and then a charger. So one caveat I did have, and something to be aware of if you are going to purchase this camera brand new, or potentially second hand as well, because if they give you what they got, you don't get a charger. Right, little annoying, little con in that respect. So yeah, there you go. It's probably one of these things where, like, as they've upgraded technology, we're in a position where, like, for example, phones will. I know there was kind of a controversial kind of conversation around, like, oh, they don't put chargers in the box because everyone's got a charger. And I think if you're spending like anywhere close to $2,500 or $3,000, you should get a charger. I think that's just kind of thing. So that would be a con that I would say in that respect as well. It's a little annoyance. You can buy them for like 30 quid. But should I have to spend 30 quid when I've already spent like nearly 3K? Or 2.5, or whatever it ends up being? Because this camera brand new, without any discounts, is nearly $3,000. So, is that fair? I'll let you decide. There's going to be a conversation about autofocus speed. I've done a video on the wildlife channel talking about Pacific wildlife tracking focus. Again, I'll be doing one on human IF when I do some street photography with this camera as well. But as far as I can see, as you can see here, if we go backwards and forwards, the human IF is incredibly good. Bird IF or animal IF, pretty strong, pretty good when you can actually get it to track. So personally, whenever I shoot video, I always shoot manual focus anyway, just because I want to have the control. But also, when I have done photos, it's great. You sometimes have to push the manual focus so it can see the bird a little bit more. But when it's gathered that box, or when it actually understands what it's looking at, then it does pretty much stick. The only real issue, I talked about this on the wildlife channel, that I'll leave this video in the description down below for those who wish to view it in more detail, is when there's something in the way between you and the bird, there is sometimes a hunt issue. So it will hit focus on the front branch rather than going through that and then hitting the animal which you're trying to capture. So they're the only things I would, what I can talk about in the 10 days because of what I've shot in that respect as well. Ergonomics is what I've next got on my list. I really like how this camera's laid out. It seems to be really thought out in regards to where the button placement is. The one thing which I did get from working on the GH5 quite a lot is you can press the shutter. Now this might be a settings thing that I'm not seeing, but you normally in video mode, so let's say I've got the Nikon in video mode, I should be able to ideally press the shutter actuation button as if I was taking a photo, and it should trigger recording for me. Now the thing is, as I say, that might be a setting, but for me it shouldn't be a setting. It should just work out of the box. It should just do that, because now maybe I'm coming from a place where that's what I'm used to, right? Maybe, sure, but for me, there should be an ease of use in that regard. In regards to everything else, the buttons are where you think they should be, right? Shutter speed dial is where you think it is. Aperture dial is where you think it is. ISO button's kind of awkward. Touch screen's really, really intuitive though, so I don't even bother pressing the buttons in 95% of cases. Don't really need to necessarily change ISO, and if I do, I'll just touch the screen. I'll probably end up remapping the function, one of the function buttons on the front to be ISO or something along those lines. Again, too early in the workflow at the moment to really know. There is going to be workarounds for that. I imagine I can probably remap the shutter button so that it will act as a video recorder as well. As I'm talking about this as well, talk about video recording, this camera is limited to 30 minutes of recording, so it's not ideal when the GH5 has an unlimited amount of recording. And again, most cinema cameras, etc., have unlimited recording. There is workarounds, right, for this in regards to if you put it into an Animos or you're outputting from the HDMI into a recorder or into another monitor, you can basically record forever in that respect, and then that obviously will give you the options to record onto SSDs if you wished, etc, etc, etc. For me, it's kind of a meh. It would be nice. It'd be a nice to have, and probably something they could update potentially in firmware, but the reason why they're unlikely to do that is annoyingly, for those who don't know, why some cameras have these limitations and why they don't, is how they're classed in regards to their tax band when they're brought into the UK. 95% of these cameras and etc. are all built China, Japanese, Thailand, somewhere around there, and then they're having to be brought in my case, to the UK, potentially in wherever you're viewing from in that regard. So that's normally why, because there's different tax bands in regards to whether this is a photo camera, and if they put a limit on the recording, they can technically then have it as a lower band, so they pay less import tax on it, meaning they can bring the price down for you. Is the rationale in theory, but I personally would just rather they and this is more of a longer term tax issue with import tax, I'd rather they just blanket it all into one thing, so we could just do away with these limits in that respect. And every video camera in the world, even photography cameras, even consumer grade cameras, hopefully will get to the point where they can record in forever, for as long as their batteries and etc last, for forever. In that respect, because there's no real reason, it's just a little bit of irritation, but as 95% of what I do is event based, you're not going to be filming for longer than 30 minutes, so it's not a big deal. And if you do need to, you just press the record button, which I'll have to do probably halfway through this rant, and then start again. So one of the benefits you can get around this is if you are running dual cameras, you can then switch to the other camera. So there we go. That's the recording and ergonomic side of things. ISO performance is another one that I'm sure many people will be asking about and want to know about. Now, I've done quite a lot of high ISO tests, mostly wildlife wise, just because of the nature of what I've shot on it so far. I've had photos up to 4000 ISO that are pretty clean in that respect, as in very usable without denoise, and the same on video. If you are, shooting at the top ends of the ISOs, then of course you're going to get grain. Again, how much are you pulling the footage? How much is the log being pulled? Are you pulling it 3 stops? Yes, you're going to see grain. If you're pulling it half a stop, probably not going to see grain. So I think it's really about use case. I've been pleasantly surprised, especially coming from a GH5, where the GH5 will create pretty much unusable grain from anything from 1600 up. ISO performance is pretty good though. So there we go. Again, why are you shooting in complete darkness? If you need to shoot in complete darkness consistently, buy a Sony. Is my answer. There you go. But to be honest, 95% of modern cameras are going to give you really, really good performance in that perspective as well. So let's nerd out, shall we? Let's talk a little bit about the technical specs of this camera and why I went about actually purchasing it. Obviously, the stacked CMOS, this is a stacked CMOS sensor, which is basically the only one. So this one, the R8, the Z8, and the Z9 are the only ones with this is a semi-stacked CMOS sensor instead of being fully, but it will create, as I said, better image quality, better ISO performance, etc. So that's a win. That was one of the things that really drew me towards it. The jump, obviously, from micro four thirds or APS-C to full frame. Yes, the glass is heavier. Yes, the glass is more expensive. But welcome to 2024. Everyone shoots on 24 megapixel or more full frame glass because of depth of field, because of low light performance. You want your footage to look professional. In 95% of cases, that's what you want. Doesn't mean you can't get it out of that. I did for many, many times. But if you're looking at depth of field, you're going to have an easier time getting depth of field with full frame. That's one of the important jumps. For me, this is kind of a nuanced one. The SD card and CF Express card slots on this camera kind of gives me an upgrade path into higher quality, which we'll talk a little bit later on, higher quality video recording, but also upgrading those speeds and those cards as well. On the GH5, you can only record on 2 SD cards at the same time. Now, SDs are great, SDs are cheap. In comparison to the either QDX or the C Express cards that this one can shoot on. But again, it's about that output. And again, when you're also shooting photos, I can outrun the buffer, technically, on this camera. Now, can I do that with a CF Express? I don't know. I don't have one to test it. But when I do, I will be. So let me know if you be subscribed if you want to see that video. I'm being pleasantly surprised, though, with how good the codec is, which is another reason why I wanted to go to this camera for the H.265, versus the H.264, which you get on the GH5 and older cameras in that respect as well. It's more efficient, the file size is smaller, and it's still great quality. Again, kind of briefly touched on this as well. This camera is a big jump in regards to quality of photos, autofocus when shooting photos and video, but also as a hybrid shooter, it's incredibly powerful in comparison to the GH5. Now again, stupid comparison, I get that, but for me, absolute game changer in regards to what I can offer my clients, what I can offer the use cases, and what I can actually get out of when I go to events and when I actually just take this camera for fun. Imagine taking a video camera for fun to events, etc., to capture those moments as well that are really, really important in that respect as well. A quick little time-lapse update for those who've been following the channel and following my work for a very long time. You'll know I'm an avid time-lapse photographer. Haven't only done very basic testing on this camera so far in regards to time-lapses, but been pleasantly surprised. And there's a couple of features that I've never had on a camera, but now I wish I had on every time-lapse camera I own, which is just a little thing called, it creates a folder in the SD card for the time-lapse, and you can have the option to reset the number of frames. So it will start as 0000 and then run to, let's say, for example, 480. Really, really great little features, and they make the post work on a time-lapse, especially longer term time-lapses, really, really useful, really, really powerful in that respect as well. So another reason why I didn't go with the Mark II, as I've already kind of alluded to briefly, is the update on the the electronic viewfinder. You can get external ones, more faff, more rigging, would rather have it in camera. This one has a really, really good EVF. I've actually found I've been using EVFs since getting into wildlife filming. I've actually found that I've been using EVFs in event work as well, because there's certain shots that just make it easier for me to shoot. On that though, the GH5 that I've shot on for many years has a button which allows you to auto change whether it's going to stay on the screen and show the screen, or whether it's going to just show it through the EVF. This camera, again, might be a menu thing, might be a way around it, but at the moment how it comes in the box is there is an auto trigger, and it's a sensor on the back of the iris to see whether your eye is up to the camera or not. So which frame or which etc. should it specifically look at, or specifically, in that respect, where should it show that frame. Now the issue is, if you're shooting handheld and you're trying to get stabilized footage by pulling the camera to your chest is going to trigger that iris, which means you can no longer see what you're filming. Now, as I say, there might be ways around it. If there is a way around it, I'll let you know when I do the full review. But that's a little annoyance for me, because I'm used to just having a button where I can lock it onto the screen, onto the EVF, depending on what I'm doing, or have it flip in that respect, because in some cases you'll want both. I would rather actually have the option to either just use the screen, just use the EVF, or actually have it flip with that sensor, because when I'm then shooting handheld for events and other such things, I can then just lock it to the screen, and when I'm shooting with wildlife, I can either have it hybrid or just in the EVF, for example. So that's just my thoughts there. Already briefly touched on this, but I'll touch on it again. The subject tracking is, in my experience at least, the human subject tracking. Really, really powerful, really, really good. Animal is okay. It's all right. It's not terrible. Again, I would say actually if you're filming content, especially wildlife content, you should be manually focusing and using focus assist tools like focus peaking, which this camera has, hurrah, and things like that. So you should really be doing that more than relying on the autofocus. The only time where I would say you should be relying on the autofocus is if you're shooting birds in flight as photography. And in theory video, but again, I think you should be manually focusing. Different setup, makes more sense, looks nicer, etc. And that is the time where it does have that hunting issue when you come to having something in the way. It always wants a close focus on the bush, the tree, etc. That you have. So keep that in mind. But again, you can manually override it. And then when it does get that box on the bird, it will pretty much track it and be very sticky in that respect as well. So image stabilization is the next thing on my list to talk about. Now, keep in mind, again, coming from GH5, so I'm expecting really, really good image stabilization. It's pretty good out of the box. Now, I haven't played around with the electronic stabilization yet, which will basically crop in on the image slightly to be able to give you another step. It has 5-axis RV or vibration reduction is what Nikon calls it, but it's basically image stabilization. It works the same and pretty good, right? It's kind of what I would expect in a more modern mirrorless camera. If you don't have it, you're looking at a cinema camera. You're then wanting to put it on a gimbal. Again, this is really looking at solo shooters, which are more likely to rig it kind of in a cage, looking to shoot handheld. So yes, I would want image stabilization in this case. For a lot of the work that I'm doing, that's really important. Some of the work is on tripod, some of the work is on gimbal, but 95% of the time I'm shooting handheld. So it's really, really important for me to have image stabilization. Pretty good, as I said. Just, again, it's not to replace your ability to shoot it stable or for you to shoot it well. It just adds that extra layer. And then, of course, you can add warp stabilizer or equivalent, depending on your editor as well. Now, this is a kind of a caveat, right? And I think this, from my understanding at least, on this camera, at the moment I'm shooting 4K 24, and this is in DX mode because it automatically changed it because it knows I'm using a DX lens. It knows that. I was really, really shocked and surprised that it did that first time round. The autofocus experience is really, really good still, as I said earlier, but also we're in the position where because this camera can shoot 6K, because this camera can shoot 5.3K, we actually get 120p 4K. Now, I don't do a lot of slow motion a lot of the time. Having the option to film in a slower mode, so 120p or even 240p if you're willing to stop down to 1080p. I will be doing tests on this, do not worry. But it's really powerful to have those options because it allows you to be getting more creative and be able to emphasize that short moment a lot more. So you can stretch it a lot more. I'm used to having only 4K 60p on the GH5, right? So for me, it's really important to have that jump. Now, again, if you want to have that high resolution, but also be able to slow it down to 40%, rather than 20%, you can shoot up to on this camera up to 6K 12-bit 60 frames per second, which will allow you to slow it down by 40%, right? And have that 6K and have those beautiful colors and be able to shoot in log, etc., right? And have raw video as well. Something I haven't tested. You need the other card. You need a faster card, but it should be a beautiful image. Something to think about. It's another tool, right? It's another way of adding potential value or potentially adding a difference in that shot to what you are otherwise doing, right? I like to add in slow motion. I like to use it sparingly. Why are you using it? Emphasizing a backflip, for example, emphasizing a bird flying that's otherwise really hard to see because they're really fast and really annoying, right? Slow-mo water, etc. Things like this is the reasons why we should be using slow motion. You shouldn't just be like, I'm going to shoot everything slow motion because, right? It's a look. Look at that look and then consider how, what, when, and why. Just a quick one on DX mode versus full frame mode. For me, even if you're using full frame glass, you can change the image area to use the DX sensor. So it's going to crop in a little bit and turn basically this camera into a APS-C sensor. Now, for those who don't shoot wildlife, this is not a big deal, right? But actually, I'll give you a use case about why it would be a good deal. But especially when you're shooting wildlife, what you want is extra range. So I've got 2x extender, 150 to 600mm, so I'm 1200mm, right? But that bird might be a little bit far away. I move closer, it's going to fly away. Not going to see that nice behavior, etc. But what I can do is turn this camera into DX mode, crops in on the sensor, only allows you to shoot 4K. 4K is really good. The 4K looks beautiful. No, it's not as good as the 5.3 or the 6K, I imagine, but you do get the extra range. So it's as if it's on a crop sensor camera. This is something to consider. Again, in an event use case or a corporate use case, if I've got this Sigma 18 to 35 on, or the equivalent in full frame, because of course I would have to use both, right? I would then be able to use the 24mm. So I'm going to be going to the 24mm to 200 as a starting lens for this camera. I could use the 24mm, right, all the way to the 200mm on full frame. Then I could switch it into DX mode and then get the cropped version of that. So I could get even more range, right? So again, if I want that more compression, or I want specifically to showcase or have more variation in my shots in regards to millimeters that I'm using, which would infinitely make your films better, then I have that option because I can use the DX mode. And that's one of the reasons actually why I think this camera is potentially underrated in that respect, because I don't think enough. I know other cameras can do it, but one of the benefits of this camera is having that full frame and the DX mode with still really, really high quality footage and images. Again, you could, I imagine, don't know, haven't tested it, but I imagine you could do the same thing with photos as well. Again, really, really quickly, can go up to 12-bit. At the moment, I shoot 10-bit, 5.3K for wildlife and 4K for everything else because I've only got a DX lens. But you can shoot up to 12-bit RAW on Nikon RAW or N-Log specifically to give you more dynamic range, etc., etc. So that's really, really helpful and really, really wonderful. But again, haven't tested it. There's also a bunch of pro features that I have kind of written down that I think is going to be really useful for me, but haven't had a chance to test a lot of these. You have timecode, so you can sync multiple cameras with any timecode. Specifically, I can sync these two cameras through timecode. I'm not going to. I'm used to syncing with audio. If you have that need and you have that want, again, it's really, really great. Already talked about image stabilization, really, really powerful. Also got image stabilization, dual format recording. So what you can do is you can basically set either simultaneously to record a proxy file of it. Again, haven't tested it. Don't really need proxies that much in my workflow, especially when using efficient codecs like H.2.5. But the option's there if those who want to use it. Cool. Would have liked to see, again, probably doesn't really fit in the brand or the mid-range which we're talking about in regards to this camera, but would have liked to have seen a mini QDX or excuse me, a pro audio solution. So this has a 3.5mm jack on it. Would have liked to have seen maybe an option like the Sonys have, where you can get a top handle with top grade audio and obviously put in those QDX slots in that respect. But there will be workarounds, there will be things you can do, etc. I don't even own a microphone that can plug into it, but I thought I'd mention it. So all of my microphones will work on this camera, and to be honest, most of them, unless you're again not really targeting, like you wouldn't be buying this camera necessarily, you may be buying it as a B, but if you're looking for top cinema grade audio quality, etc., you would A, be running it into recorder anyway because the preamps are going to be better, or B, you'd be running it into a higher end cinema camera where you're going to sync it in post anyway. So again, think about the use case for this camera. The use case for this camera, in my opinion, is for solo shooters, and Nikon also say on their website that it is for solo shooters, hence the 3.5mm jack in my thoughts. But it would have been nice to potentially have an upgrade to the larger, or the more important, or the more professional grade XT slots, or whatever they're called. Also, you've got little things like you can charge this camera through USB-C, so I can have a camera battery in the camera and then also run a V-lock to constantly charge that battery, or basically run it off a V-lock. 95% of the time I do that. Could also, again, in a office setup like this, run a USB-C cable from the wall and plug it directly in. So basically have a pseudo dummy battery. On the GH5, I have a dummy battery in that respect as well. But the issue, as I've said previously, when you're running it into a V-lock, the V-locks I have, the 100-watt one, sometimes the D-tap comes out, which if on this camera, it would basically kill the footage that we're recording if it was writing to a card, because even unless you catch it early enough, it's going to be problematic. So the better solution is what this more modern camera has, which is having a USB-C that you can either charge power banks. Nikon sells one. I won't be buying it. I've got V-locks. There you go. I'll be using V-locks when I rig this camera up, which I'll be doing a rig tour when I've actually finalised what I'm going to do with it and how I'm going to rig it for event shooting. So subscribe if you want to see that video. Again, kind of things that you would expect. Nlog, just a log format to allow you to grade it how you wish. A little bit annoying on how you actually find it, but it's basically just when you go to set the video settings, then you go into at the bottom, there's like S-tone. You can change it. It's basically just a color profile. I don't think it should be there. I think it should be in the main menu, but that's just me. Waveform exists. That's good. Like that. Peaking, again, really, really good for focus peaking. It's pretty accurate as well from what I can see and works really, really well. Again, all these features I'm kind of used to from the GH5, so glad to see they copied across. Big concern, worry, etc. In that respect is that I've personally found that when you take this lens off, there's no shutter skirt or no shutter that comes down so that the sensor is just exposed. Right now, this seems to be the only model, the mirrorless Nikons, which has this. Now, I don't know why it has this, because every other camera has a level of protecting the sensor. The only thing is, just be careful. Just don't, specifically put your sensor at risk, and if so, just clean it. There you go. But it's a little annoying. Wish I had a level of protection or skirt, or curtain that comes down. You're on mirrorless, so your sensor is going to be exposed in that respect. So what did I actually film on this camera in these 10 days that I'm talking about specifically? So I filmed the Christmas Tree Festival at St Thomas's Church. That was very lovely and very Christmassy, so thank you to them. I also filmed the Christmas market in Salisbury, and you will have seen some of this footage over the top, I imagine. Along with also kind of a nerd day when I first got it for wildlife, but also some really, really good light for wildlife as well. We're in winter. Can't get the most out of it because there's not as much wildlife going around at the moment. Also managed to finish the Grovely Wood project on the end of this camera as well. As I said, that's my impressions, that's my thoughts. Just to give you a brief outline of what my thoughts are. This may become a video where it's this camera versus this camera. I don't think it will. That's not really a fair comparison. I wanted to talk about the camera, wanted to talk about my experience with it over the last 10 days or so. Of course, I'll be spending more time with it, using it more often, etc. as well, and be able to create more content for you across the Christmas period into the new year, especially as events start going. I'll be able to do BTSs and etc. like that. So thank you ever so much for coming back and joining me once again. If you did enjoy this video, slightly longer, little ranty-esque, but sharing my opinion, sharing my thoughts on the Nikon Z6 Mark III. I would love to hear what you think in the comment section down below, and hopefully this informed your purchasing decisions on whether you're looking to buy this camera or looking to upgrade soon. If so, hopefully this was valuable to you. Thank you ever so much for coming back and joining me, and I'll see you very, very soon for some brand new content talking about how you can leverage social media, video, photography, etc. For your business in 2025. And if you're new to the channel and this is the first video you're seeing and you got this far, want to subscribe, it's free. I'll be creating more content about this camera and what's going on social media, etc, etc, very, very soon. So thank you ever so much for coming back and joining me, and I'll see you very, very soon.